Good morning, everyone. This is Brittany Manzo, the task force facilitator. It's good to see many of you. We'll give folks just another minute to jump on and get on video. In the meantime, if you haven't had a chance to check your email in the last hour or two, Mickey and I sent around the agenda as well as a link to our virtual whiteboard. So please check that out and jump into the whiteboard if you are able. Mickey, can you keep an eye on participants and let me know when you see most task force members here? Thanks. And I think some of our task force members may be listed as attendees instead of panelists. So I'm not sure if we can change that so that their faces can be up here as well, centered. All right, great. Well, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. For folks I haven't met, my name is Brittany Manzo and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the facilitator of the Emergency Homelessness Task Force. Welcome and good morning. Happy Tuesday. I mentioned earlier, it's great to see your faces hopping on. Come on video when you have a chance. It's good to see you all. Mentioned a little bit earlier, if you hadn't had a chance to check your email, Mickey and I sent around the agenda as well as a link to our virtual whiteboard that we'll be working in today. So if you could take a look at that, check that out. If you didn't get the email, just shoot Mickey a note and she will get it over to you as soon as she can. Great. So top of our agenda today is a big warm welcome to some new task force members. We've spent a good amount of time on introductions to strengthen our partnerships and do some coalition building here at the task force. So I want to do the same for our new task force members. Folks will recall that at our last meeting, we did some stakeholder mapping to see who wasn't in the room and who needed to be and who needed to stay informed about this process along the way. So I'm going to give our new task force members a moment to introduce themselves in just a second. But first, I just want to say welcome to Bob Bohack of Jericho Road and Oasis Village, Carlos Salcedo of St. Charles, Eliza Wilson at J-Bar-J, and Tammy Bainey at Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council, as well as Mike Krantz, the Chief of Police in Bend. I had a chance to meet with all of you yesterday, and we're just so glad to have you in the task force and that you were able to make the time to be with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to you for some personal introductions, if you'd like, as well as a summary of your organization's mandate. What do you bring to the region's efforts to prevent and end homelessness? And for those of you who've checked out our whiteboard, that's a question we're going to be asking everyone today. What's your mandate? What do you bring to the region's efforts to prevent and end homelessness? So start giving it some thought as you're hearing introductions from our new task force members. So Tammy, can I start with you with an introduction from COIC?
Sure, happy to. So hi, wonderful to see many of you friendly faces and some new faces. My name is Tammy Bainey. I'm the Executive Director at COIC. We are the region's Council of Governments. And so our role is to support the region, and our membership is the members of Crook, Deschutes, Jefferson counties, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, and all the cities therein. So we have a 17-member board, 12 of those are elected officials, and 5 are appointed members. So our goal really is to make sure that we are in the space of supporting each individual community or the region as a whole. And so we've been tapped a bit to stand in the space of helping to convene some of the regional discussions of how we can tie together some of the efforts that are happening within the communities. Previously, I spent 12 years as Eric Kropp's assistant at the county in elected position there as a county commissioner. And so this is just a really critical piece to the success of our region as a whole. And just count us in as a support. We are a nimble and talented group of individuals that are here to help support the efforts that are happening. So more later in terms of the actual efforts that we've been engaged in, but really excited to be invited and happy to be here with all of you this morning.
Great. Thanks so much, Tammy. Bob, can I turn it over to you? Oh, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bob Bohack. I've lived here in Oregon with my wife since 2013. This stint, I actually was in Oregon, got my master's degree back in the late 60s from the University of Oregon. Couldn't find a job in the state at that time. Primarily, I've been a math instructor, assistant professor, et cetera. Mostly at community colleges. A few years were spent at baccalaureate institutions. Back in the 90s, actually late 80s, my wife and I spent time volunteering at food pantries, soup kitchens. I became involved, been on the board of Habitat for Humanity in Coeur d'Alene. That's where we lived immediately prior to moving here. And then upon retirement, I got rather involved with the St. Vincent de Paul, which is the largest provider of services in the Coeur d'Alene area. A board member, worked at the help center as a volunteer. So when we moved here, we were looking for volunteer work, and I started doing different things as a volunteer for St. Vincent's here in town. Became involved with the outreach program that had been started by Covo, been turned over to individuals here in Redmond, and have been doing that since. While doing that, several of us had conversations about enabling and helping. And from that grew the project of trying to provide some transitional shelter for those who are unhoused here in the region, and hence the Oasis Village. So approximately 2 years ago, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I became a board member at Jericho. They took over the support of our outreach program, and we are currently working on getting a fiscal sponsorship with Jericho for our Oasis program as we apply for 501c3 status.
Great. Thank you, Bob. And for folks who are just logging on, we're introducing some of our new task force members. So I'm going to turn it over to, sorry, the spots are moving, so I want to make sure that you're here before I call on you. Eliza, could I ask you to introduce yourself from JBAR-J? Thank you.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I'm Eliza Wilson, and I've lived in Central Oregon probably for 18 years. Was homeless as a child throughout my childhood, many times with my family, and eventually by myself as a teenager. And at that point, we were living in Central Oregon already. And I was a homeless youth in JBAR-J programs, actually, two different ones, first at the Loft and then at Grandma's house. And really, you know, went on to college, graduated high school, went on to college, and ever since my internship, my first internship in college, I've really worked in homeless services, and eventually at JBAR-J, where I've now been for about off and on. Well, I've been worked for them twice, but this last time about 7 years. So JBAR-J offers a continuum of services for homeless youth in Central Oregon, really in the region, with the app project, which is anti-trafficking, case management, training and education for the community and people who have experienced labor and sex trafficking. Cascade Youth and Family Center, which has a street outreach program, Basic Center program, which is like family mediation, shelter, and preventative services for younger youth who are still in school. We have a homeless shelter for youth ages 16 to 21 in Bend, and then Grandma's House, where I'm the program manager of Grandma's House, which is a shelter for pregnant and parenting youth. I also oversee the rapid rehousing program for youth through JBAR-J, the coordinated entry system. I'm the chair of the coordinated entry system for the region, and I'm on the HLC board and have been for several years. I think that's all.
Great, thank you. And I'm seeing a few more new task force members join us. Hi there, Kristen. So glad you're here. And Officer DeLuca, glad you're here too. I'm going to turn it over to Carlos for a quick personal introduction and an overview of your mandate at St. Charles.
My name is Carlos. I work for St. Charles in the Community Engagement Department. I've been in Bend for 31 years now. And my mandate is our vision, which is creating America's healthiest community. And obviously the housing issue impacts our vision. Nice to meet all of you and nice to see those of you that I know.
Great, thanks, Carlos. And Chief Krantz, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. Thank you, Brittany. Mike Krantz, Chief of Police in the City of Bend. I've been here for about just over a year and came from Portland, 26 and a half, 27 years there. My most recent assignment there prior to leaving was Assistant Chief. And then right before that, I was the Central Precinct Commander for 3 years, where, as you can imagine, that intersection between law enforcement, criminal justice system, and homelessness, and all the social service providers that we partnered with and were stakeholders in the overall provision of service was a big relationship piece. So I've had a lot of experience around the intersection, and as we're seeing it grow here, obviously that becomes more and more intertwined. So I'm assuming that I was invited to this meeting by everyone because of that intersection of law enforcement and homelessness, and where that happens to come together, and our experiences here. So I'm glad to be here and be able to provide whatever I can to the group and support it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Officer DeLuca, I believe attending on behalf of the Deschutes County Sheriff. Thank you. I know the mute button's hard to find. Let me see if I can unmute you. Not yet. Do you want to work on the mute button, and we'll see? We'll come back to you. Kristen from the Central Oregon Health Council, would you mind giving a quick personal introduction and overview of the Health Council's mandate as it relates to preventing and ending homelessness?
Okay, I think you're talking to me. I work for Pacific Source, however.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I work really closely with the Health Council, but I just wanted to make that distinction.
Thank you. I apologize.
No, that's okay. My name is Kristen Tobias. I am the Central Oregon CCO Community Health Coordinator. So I work with our Medicaid OHP members here in Central Oregon from our Northern Klamath region, Jefferson County, Crook County, and Deschutes County. And I also sit on the Central Oregon Health Council's, stable housing RIP work group. So that might have been part of the confusion there. And let's see, we just, we kind of want to figure out how Pacific Source can support in this work. And yeah, today's my first meeting, so just trying to get an idea of what you guys are talking about and how we can be helpful.
Great, thanks so much, Kristen. And spoiler alert, the Central Oregon Health Council will be joining the Emergency Homelessness Task Force, but they won't be able to join today. Kristen, thank you so much for making time to join us. Do we have anyone else who is new to the task force who didn't have a chance to introduce themselves? Okay, so as we shared with a small group of some of the new task force members yesterday, we're still early in our process, building as we go along, kind of snowballing along, whereas we see a need for new partners, different perspectives at the table as we undertake strategic planning and making some progress on emergent priorities. We will invite new folks to the table, appreciate folks' willingness to be part of that coalition building and offer your partners a read-in after meeting they miss or an update on where we are. It's particularly difficult to do virtually, so appreciate any extra effort folks can give, especially without a chat box, to shoot new members an email and welcome them in. I am hoping to get one of our task force meetings in person, or at least make some time down there, but we're not quite there yet due to COVID. All of that is to say, welcome to the task force. We are going to start working through our agenda today, which you should have in your email. Our first topic is going to be group agreements and norms. I know that some folks roll their eyes at group agreements and pausing to take time for the stuff that we do every day, but I wanted to create space to co-create the commitments we make to each other as a task force, so that we can set clear expectations around accountability and how we support each other and this process. So we're going to move over to the Miro board that you all got a link to this morning. If you could, you are welcome to minimize your Zoom or put it over to the side so that you can jump directly into your browser, but I'm here sharing as well on Zoom. I think, can everybody see the Miro board? Great. Is anyone having any technical difficulties navigating Miro so far? Take yourself off mute and jump in with any questions. Someone else may have the same problem. Okay. So the purpose of our group agreements, as I mentioned, is so that we can co-create our norms, co-create how we're going to work together. I see folks zipping around Miro and reading through. So pause, take a minute to browse through these and pick your favorite. I'm going to ask a task force member to read each of them, or a different task force member to read each of them and offer just a quick bit on why you think it's important and how you interpret this group agreement. At the end, we'll make sure that see if there are any edits or additions we want to make sure that we're able to show up fully to this space to work together. So our first group agreement, could I get a volunteer to read this one and share a bit about why you think it's important? I'll start calling on people. Keith, you laughed at that one, so you knew that it was going to be you with the first one.
I'm still trying to figure out how to use this board.
Okay.
So are you saying the first one is just listen with respect?
That's right.
I'm supposed to explain why that matters?
Yeah. We're assuming good intent. That's
yeah. I mean,
a deeper part of that.
You know, I think overall with these, we've got to make sure we're all rowing in the same direction, and that we're not attending a meeting and saying one thing and outside of the meeting working against the purpose of the group.
Thanks. And I think with assuming good intent too, there's a little box off to the side about trying to wonder instead of judge. I know you all work together on a day-to-day basis, have some, the ways that we all collaborate. So just trying to step into a space of assuming good intent and asking questions with wonder whenever we can, rather than judgment, will help us move through maybe difficult conversations or make quicker progress around strategizing. How about the next one? Is anyone familiar with the oops, ouch, snaps kind of facilitation framework? You guys haven't done oops, ouch, snaps before? So by using oops, ouch, and snaps, we create space to acknowledge impact. We recognize that we're not going to get it right all the time. We're going to step in it sometimes. But this gives us space to stop and say, oops, that is not, I realize the intent of what I said, and I'd like to backtrack or correct myself. And we want to create space for each other to do that. We also want to create space for folks to say, ouch, that did not land well, and here's why. Creating space to acknowledge that impact. And snaps, sometimes when we are on a roll in agreement, we will just keep agreeing with each other and take up all the time agreeing with each other and not get anywhere. So snaps is a visual way of saying, I agree, and we're on the same page without being disruptive to the progress of a conversation. How about step up, step back? Can anyone speak to that one? It's one that we could be practicing right now.
I'll go with that one because I think this is a really good group norm, because like for me, I'm an oversharer. So in a group setting, I try to give other people space to be able to come forward and talk and not be the one to first put in my opinion, or because I tend to share a lot. So, and then for those who really struggle with sharing in a group environment, to just kind of like step up and make that point to share sometimes.
Thanks, Eliza. And further on that, as far as stepping up, if there are things that would make it easier or safer for you to step up into this space, please add those when we get to what additions to group agreements you'd like to see or what could help you participate. We want to be sure to make space for that. How about asking the hard questions? So asking hard questions is an encouragement to move through conflict rather than around it. If you've ever read We're Going on a Bear Hunt or sung it with your kids, you know we can't go around it. We got to go through it with difficult conversations in particular. Conflict can be challenging. I have a background in conflict resolution, so I hope that you all can trust that you're in a space where we can move through conflict with care and attention. That doesn't necessarily mean everything will be resolved. We will accept that things will remain unfinished sometimes, but we are going to commit, I hope, to moving through challenges together as the task force. Can anyone speak to prioritizing racial equity? There is a big yellow cheat sheet there for you. Or speaking to your own understanding of racial equity would be great too. Okay, I'm gonna use the, yeah.
If I could just say, I appreciate this this kind of focusing in on racial equity, but I actually think that a better bullet might be prioritizing equity more broadly, because particularly with the homeless population, we do see multiple forms of inequity showing up in the situations that people face that are experiencing homelessness. So I'd just like to kind of add that or make a recommendation to broaden that.
Are there other descriptors that you'd want to include around equity, specific racial equity, gender equity, any specifics that you'd like to hammer home?
I don't. I mean, I think that I'm sure that many of us come with many different thoughts on what equity means. So I'd like to just add the broadening piece.
Sure. And for a bit of just background, the reason I call out racial equity in particular and try to get as specific as possible is that when our public systems are failing, they're often modeling or acting upon the way that they were designed, which was for some to succeed and for some not to succeed. That is the way that our public structures have been set up for a long time. And so prioritizing racial equity gives us the time to recognize how structural racism informs and drives our system failures and dismantling that together. When we design around the most historically marginalized communities, we actually create systems that serve everyone because you're addressing the most significant needs, which by default encompasses all of the needs. And so that's why I focus on prioritizing racial equity. And I think it's a great idea to expand that to equity more broadly as well, to make sure that we're setting up everyone to have what they need to be able to succeed in our society. So I appreciate that addition, Commissioner Chang. I'm wondering if anyone can speak to power dynamics, particularly in a task force like this, where we are bringing all the tools we have to the table to try to develop a regional strategic plan.
I'll dive in.
Thanks, Tammy.
I think there can be a hesitation to, and it ties some of these together around asking hard questions and also in speaking up, especially if you feel that your voice is maybe not as important or as powerful as maybe Commissioner Chang or Councillor Perkins, or and so a hesitation of I also maybe don't want to ask a hard question because I don't want to be offensive to that individual in a position of perceived power. And so, I suspect that that could run pretty concurrent with the chief of police and sheriff. And so I think it's that dynamic of just concerned about how we're showing up and feeling as though maybe there's an inequitable power dynamic just in the virtue of positions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's also the flip side of it where we don't necessarily always recognize the power we do have or the ways that we do have decision making or influencing power. That's really important in systems like this. You may not make the final funding decisions, you may not make the final strategy decision, but your recommendation goes a long way, or you do have a specific set of decision making responsibilities that you carry. And recognizing that is really important when it comes to a task force, because that helps us all understand what we're able to do together, what is within our realm of influence. So thank you so much for that, Tammy. And I'd like to move to the next one, valuing diverse expertise. I'm curious if anyone can speak in particular to proximity to issues and the role that plays in problem solving, particularly around social issues like housing instability. So this is a framework. Proximity is a framework that Brian Stevenson I am completely blanking on the name of his book right now, which will come to me at a very inconvenient moment, I'm sure. But Brian Stevenson has spoken to the framework of proximity quite a bit, where the proximity to an issue is where the most valuable expertise on that issue lives. That's where the solutions live, is most proximate. So if you're very distant from experiencing an issue, odds are there are other folks who could help round out your understanding and perspective and expertise. So we want to value diverse expertise here and prioritize folks who have proximity to the issue at hand, houselessness in Central Oregon, as well as the drivers of houselessness in Central Oregon. So last, we want to also center the perspectives and guidance of people experiencing homelessness. That is a more specific way to make the point above. And excuse me, in our last meeting in our stakeholder mapping, we did name that we wanted to invite people experiencing homelessness or representatives of people experiencing homelessness to the table. And we are making some progress there, but we're not quite there yet to have them as task force members, but that is something, particularly I think as we move into October and our strategy session, it'll be really important to have folks with lived experience at the table as representatives of folks who are living outside and unstable, or housing unstable, I should say, excuse me. Lastly, I have some just regular old norms that are here, being respectful of others' time and constraints, being present or as present as you can, offering each other compassion that we are living in this Zoom world where bio breaks and children sometimes need to be the priority, and fully understand that and give each other grace. We appreciate if you can give notice if you can't attend, and use the raise hand function here on Zoom to jump in if it's helpful. Are there any other amendments, additions to the group agreements? What's missing? What other commitments do you need from your colleagues to pursue this work together? Or are there any group agreements you've worked with in the past that you'd really like to have here? Yeah, Tammy.
One of the pieces that continues to come up, and I don't know if it's a group agreement or maybe it's a shared value, but a statement around stigma, stereotypes, and generalizations. It feels as though that's a significant barrier to a lot of the communications, and just there's a lot of stigma, generalization, and stereotyping of individuals that we are here to serve.
So avoid stigma, stereotypes, and generalizations, and also creating space for folks to name maybe when they hear those. I'd like to also, I appreciate that. And I want to just norm, and maybe I'll find a way to put this into a bullet, pausing to share information and education. There are a lot of experts with a lot of different areas of expertise on this screen. So let's take the time we need to pause and ask folks questions. I am going to see if it'll be possible for us to have a chat box in the future so that we could do that a little bit more nimbly together. But please feel free to raise your hand if there are clarifications you'd like to make or discussion with others. Carolyn, do you want to jump in with other amendments?
Yeah, thanks. The piece that seems to be missing here for me is something around funding. And that I guess I want to make sure that I'm not, inadvertently spending someone else's money. So I think, or maybe I'm doing it purposely, which I have been under, but so I just feel like there's a component around norms and funding and the fact that we haven't funded these initiatives. We had a 10-year plan to end homelessness. We didn't do it. We're here again doing it. We've got to be committed to funding it and actuating it this time, or else I'm probably not the right person to keep coming to these meetings. So, and well, that's not true. Eric will assign me. But I think there's got to be some commitment to actually executing and funding the plan this time.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think the conversation we're going to have today, where we talk through our mandates and our responsibilities and our priorities, which is the next conversation about roles that we'll move into momentarily. The intention there is for us to understand what everyone's mandate is and to encourage each other to bring all of the tools, or as many of the tools that are in your toolbox as possible, to the task force. So Carolyn, that's funding, that's funding, that's program models, that's service types. It's bringing what you have influence over to this table. So I appreciate that really fine point on funding. And I also want to raise it to that power sharing orientation to this work together, that we're all going to bring our toys into play in the same sandbox to build a better community together. That's not made of sand, so not a perfect analogy there. Any other additions or amendments to our group agreements and norms? These are all great. One last call, if you struggle to step up in meetings like this, is there anything we can add or structures we can create if there is anything we can add or structures we can create to help you step up into the conversation, shoot me an email. Let's talk about it. I do not want to gatekeep how these meetings are run or how they're managed. I am fully open to ideas. So shoot Mickey and I an email and we will find ways to accommodate everyone's participation. Thank you all for working through these group agreements. I will make these additions and edits that we've talked through, and we'll have these up on the whiteboard for each of our meetings moving forward, as well as an opportunity for new folks or folks to add to the group agreements as needed. All right. So now, before we shift into the stakeholder mapping and roles conversation, the deep dive of our meeting today, we want to pivot to talk about key issues and emergent priorities. In our last task force meeting, we started to stand up 3 working groups or subgroups of the task force to move forward some really pressing and time constrained priorities that are relevant to our shared work here. And those were standing up the joint Bend and Deschutes County authorized encampment strategy, permanent supportive housing development strategy and finance modeling, and emergency protocol development. So I'd love to just get a quick 5-minute update on each of those, and we'll see if we need discussion before we move into the rest of our conversation today. Carolyn, can I turn to you for our authorized encampment update first?
Yep, hold on, I'm pushing the wrong buttons. Hi everyone again. So the Bend City Council last week identified 2 places for authorized encampments. The community feels very strongly about those 2 locations. Thank you to those of you calling out Kay for sending positive feedback. We really appreciate those little nuggets during the deluge. But we have a very small stakeholder. We talked about it in the subgroup. over the last week. And then we have a small stakeholder group, an invite-only meeting with the stakeholders who are really adjacent to the 9th Street site tomorrow, to really have a chance for 2 counselors to explain to that small group of stakeholders their objectives around establishing an authorized encampment, a village site, or whatever that final development looks like, and to really understand what the key concerns, the key conflicts are from those adjacent property owners. And that'll provide, the first level of conversation around what does the community outreach need to look like, what do the stakeholders need to bring back to their groups, with the goal of then meeting tomorrow night as council, and then on Thursday as the county city meeting, and really get more input, this group today, input on how we proceed. But it is pretty clear, the counselors have made really clear their intent to have at least one, if not more than one, authorized encampment inside the city of Bend, so that we can begin to provide safer places for people to stay as they find permanent housing. And so more to come, but definitely the 9th Street location is moving forward ahead of any other locations. The council also asked in a follow-up meeting to their regular meeting last Wednesday to look again at Juniper Ridge. And so I was out with our engineers yesterday looking at the construction of the North Interceptor to see where there could be a potential site, or at least providing better social and medical services, maybe mail, maybe garbage, for the people who we know are camping throughout Juniper Ridge and the whole northeast side of town, in the county and in the city. So that's about where I am. Brittany, were there any more specifics you wanted me to add at this point? Okay, thanks everyone.
Brittany, you're on mute, sorry.
Yes, and my mute button is very far away. Carolyn, thank you so much. Do folks have any questions about the authorized encampment? It sounds like, well, from our subgroup yesterday, we know that, and Carolyn's update, we'll be mapping our next steps based on stakeholder engagement, and can offer updates to this task force via email between now and our next meeting. I imagine things will evolve pretty quickly, but do folks have any discussion or questions that you want to have here now? Okay.
Commissioner Chang's got his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. My screen is moving around. Commissioner Chang.
Carolyn, to get to your earlier thought about funding, I'm wondering within the within the scope of what the city has committed in terms of funding, and what the county may match in funding, adding up to about $3 million, whether there is opportunity to do additional managed camps besides the 2 that you're working on right now, or whether that those 2 take maybe $3 million, and that's what we can do with $3 million.
Carolyn, you're muted. Sorry. I know. Carolyn.
I'm going to do the same thing. So at this point, we've been thinking that the managed camp is somewhere between $350,000 and $400,000 a year to run. That likely doesn't include the services that Molly and Colleen provide. So we're not really sure about how all of that works, but we know in terms of the site and the management. So a portion of that may be something that Deschutes County can use for the case management and the peer mentors that we would normally staff. And then so we think that the 1.5 will give us about a year of operating 2-3 camps, another 1.5 in a second year. I think the goal at this point, from what I understand, is that the council is saying this is something that we want to have on the ground for 12 or 24 months, and then we really want to be able to move people into more permanent housing as we build it. So that's why you see us operating at all kind of on all 3 levels. But I think at this point, the 1.5 committed from council, we were saying could run 2 or 3 camps for a year to a year and a half. The additional commitment from the county could be used to build out Molly and Colleen's portion of running those camps, or could be used for another year or another camp. So that's about as far as we've gotten. We really need the first one on the ground to know for sure how this is all going to work, and it all depends on the number of guests who are staying at each location, their service need. So there's a lot of variables, but that's about. So I've been thinking 3 camps, 2 years would be about $3 million. That's about how I've been doing that. But Molly's going to correct me, so I'm going to.
I wasn't going to correct. I just wanted to ask clarification, as we've had a couple different conversations around this. My understanding of the money that's going towards the project right now, and I thought that was including the 750 that I think the BOCC discussed a couple weeks ago. That money is really for the encampments and the operations of the encampments. And what I mean by operations is that, you know, those people that are there operationally dealing with the daily in and out, making sure that the garbage is taken care of, making sure that, you know, people are doing what they're supposed to do, et cetera. As well as just getting the camps up to where they need to be structurally, right, to be able to function. And then separate from that and not included in that current money, I believe, are all of the services that are needed to support these camps to make them successful. Is that correct, Carolyn?
That's how we've been talking about it up to this point. I think we've been really thinking from a space on the operational, the site setup, and the humans who are there, making sure that the toilets get washed and people come and go and they meet the obligations of the agreements that they've signed to stay at that location. I've been sort of moving forward with the 1.5 from the city plus the 750 from the county to be able to set that up. And then I know there's a second commitment of 750 from the county. That's a number where I haven't really programmed that. And so I think we do need so yes, I agree with you, Molly, is what I'm saying is additional funds would still be needed to fund the staff at the county level, to provide the level of service and the services that you all provide in behavioral health to the organizations that are running these camps.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Kurt.
I'm just curious, do we have a sense of number that would be served in the camps?
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. The sense that the recommendation we got from this group earlier was between 15 and 25 individuals, really around 15 sites, more or less. And then, as you know, that could be a household of 3, it could be a household of 2, so that we wouldn't plan for more than 25 individuals at any one location, which was one of the reasons we were looking at locations that were between 1 acre and 2 acres. As compared to 30 acres in Juniper Ridge to do a 200-person location. So really 15 sites, 15 to 25 people.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you so much, Carolyn. And can you send around an update to the task force as things evolve, as you see a need for an update? I don't know that a time restriction will make sense, but thank you for keeping us updated there. And the work group will continue to move things forward in collaboration on behalf of the task force. If you're interested in that conversation or more regular updates there, let us know, and we'll loop you in as we can. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Colleen, who's going for an update on PSH development and funding, sustainable funding and finance modeling.
Sure. Thank you, Brittany. So I'm Colleen Sinsky with Central Oregon Fuse. We're working on developing permanent supportive housing, which combines affordable housing with on-site services like healthcare access, substance use treatment, community building activities to meet the needs of folks who are the most vulnerable in our community. And that's folks who are frequently using the emergency services, crisis services, having contact with law enforcement. There's a lot of data that shows that it's not just more humane, but more cost effective to just provide housing. So I know a lot of people know that spiel already, but this is what we're here and excited to work with the task force on. Developing PSH, not just Central Oregon, but projects across the country have encountered the biggest barrier to doing so is finding the long-term funding for those supportive services. Similar issue to what it sounds like the managed camps are facing, that it's not just funding the operations and not just funding the capital development, but also how do we have 10 to 15 years of secured funding so that the developer knows that their building full of residents with some vulnerabilities is going to have the support that they need to be successful. So there's some projects coming down the pipeline in Central Oregon that Fuse is really excited to support. It's something that we have to get it right the first time. And in pioneering this in Central Oregon, we know that there's no designated source of funds for permanent supportive housing. It's braiding local, state, federal, healthcare, bond, like private donor. It's pulling together sometimes dozens of funding sources to make it successful. So we know that there are firms and consultants out there who have this expertise and who have done it before, coming up with a services plan, funding model, projected target of PSH unit development, and actually working with stakeholders on getting mechanisms in place to secure that funding. So Fuse is taking the lead on collaborating with folks in this task force and beyond the task force to pull that funding together. To do so, we just issued an RFP out to some of the leading consultants in the industry. That project was funded by the Central Oregon Health Council. So the RFP is out, and I'm happy to share it with folks. Next step is going to be inviting folks to join that work group, which would exist initially as a subcommittee of this task force, but would probably go until February or March or so. We're hoping that it'll be a pretty focused technical task force because we're building upon a lot of information we already have. So it's really a more focused look at the identified biggest problem. And I'm happy to answer questions in the larger group or offline, and we'll be reaching out to folks to invite you to be part of the process. Yeah. Molly?
Sorry, I'm having difficulties with my computer. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Colleen, thanks for that update. I just wondered and I might get my lingo wrong here, so I apologize, but I'll muddle through it. So my understanding with permanent supportive housing is there is some funding, I think from the state or from somewhere that can come with each of those units. I can't remember how much, but I know that there's questions about that. And I'm just wondering, is Fuse planning on looking into that? And if so, is Fuse planning on looking into that prior to this RFP and the projected date in the future, or is that something that you're going to wait for this consultant to do?
Yeah, good question. So before I answer, I meant to say thank you to the Board of County Commissioners for allocating, I think it was $2 million to the capital development permanent supportive housing. So that is a huge step forward in this. But Molly, to answer your question, the state through the Oregon Health Authority has set aside, would be an award of $100,000 per unit. And that was a result of us having participated in the Oregon Supportive Housing Institute last year. That award that also comes with capital dollars is limited to one project at this point. So we're hoping to come up with a replicable services model. So it's both filling the gap that award that we're hoping to get from the state would leave, figuring out exactly what the gap is, how to fill that gap, and then how do we come up with a model for future projects that won't have the benefit of that? So that might look like a state Medicaid waiver, might look like Medicaid reimbursement for peer support services, and CET revenue potentially, like healthcare funding. Like there's a bunch of different sources that we're hoping could be used to fill that.
That 100,000 per unit, is that for the life of the project, or is that just like a one-time 100,000 per unit?
One time 100,000 per unit. It might be allocated, I think, at like 10,000 per year, which is kind of what is assumed to be the cost per unit of services.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Colleen. I'm wondering, I have a question about your geographic scope with the RFP. Are you looking, what is your geographic scope?
So we are working with Housing Works. I should have said that Housing Works is a huge partner in convening this, and they serve all of Central Oregon. So the first project is looking at Bend. Beyond that, it would be Redmond and beyond. And as far as consultants, at this point, everything's on Zoom. So it's a national look at the most experienced folks in this industry.
Thanks. I did mean geographically, locally for projections, but also helpful to know that it's a national search. Well, great. I want to keep us moving here. So if you have additional questions about the RFP or that process, please do reach out to Colleen and/or myself if it's related to how that work parallels and complements the work of the task force, particularly strategic planning. I do want to name, Colleen flagged that work is expected to go through February so that they can do the amount of projections and finance braiding that is required. I think even February is a tall order of getting what we need in a row, but I'm sure we'll be able to do it. But some of those details of what financing models, the how, that will be pointed to from our strategic plan, which will be inked and done by the end of November. But it will point ahead to, in February, we will have these projections and we will make these commitments based on that research. So the task force may wind down, that work will still keep growing and building on itself, just to clarify for folks. We also wanted to include an emergency protocol development update, but I haven't heard updates there from our last meeting. So that may be some legwork I need to do offline to get folks an email update, unless someone here has an update there. Molly, you're nodding. Thank you. I apologize for not teeing that up.
Sorry, sorry that I keep on talking, but yeah, we actually have a meeting today with a number of the service providers and the county and emergency management to start work on that. So we'll have a report back for our next meeting.
Great. Thank you so much, Molly. I appreciate it. All right. So now we're going to thank you all for taking the time for these updates. If you have questions that come to mind after, please do reach out. We're going to shift into our strategic planning. Our meetings are often split this way for folks who are new to the task force. We spend some time on the urgent and pressing priorities that are related to the task force's work explicitly through the subgroups, and then we pivot to strategic planning. If there are other urgent priorities or key issues that you think we should be talking about or working on together through subgroups, please do reach out. I am open to those ideas and happy to help facilitate as I can. So now with our last half hour here today, as promised, we are going to move into talking about our roles and our mandates in the work to prevent and end homelessness in Central Oregon. So I'm going to ask you to head back to your Miro board if you had left it. The purpose of our conversation is to build a shared understanding of each other's roles in preventing and ending homelessness in Deschutes County, and to improve accountability and collaboration throughout this strategic planning process. This is our first conversation on role clarity and responsibilities. It will likely not be our last as we move through strategic planning, but this will help ground us in a shared understanding of each other's roles and responsibilities to start. So if you could navigate yourselves in your browsers, if possible, over to the roles chart, which is just to the right of today's agenda in the whiteboard. We're going to spend some time doing some independent work on your organization's roles. So please find your organization in the chart on a purple sticky note. I attempted to put them in alphabetical order. I may have missed a few folks, or I may have missed my alphabetical order. Let me know if you don't see yourself. Just come off mute if you don't see your organization here. If there are multiple folks representing one office or one team, go over to the right, you'll see a sticky note, and you can click on that, pick your color, and bring yourself on into the conversation so each person has their own color. But I think apart from the city of Bend and Deschutes County, we don't have a ton of overlap in teams and organizations here. So once you find your organization on the chart, we're going to work through the first two questions in your row. You can write over the prompting question that I added there. So first, what is your role or mandate as you see it in preventing and ending homelessness in Central Oregon? And second, what are the main functions of that role, of your team's role? What are the tasks, the functions you carry out? So we're going to take about 10 minutes to work through these first two questions. While you work, you may need to do some research. You may need to pull up those good old mission and vision statements, some strategic plans that may need to be dusted off, or recent memos to help you get your full team's perspective here. Kristen, I just spotted your hand up. I'm sorry, I missed that. Did you have some?
I don't know how to access this whiteboard. Sorry,
Sure.
I don't see a link.
That's okay. Mickey, could you forward Kristen the link to today's whiteboard? Thank you. Awesome. Thanks. Anyone else having tech difficulties with Miro? If you're having the challenge, someone else may be too. So feel free to let us know. We could do a quick primer. Okay, all right, we're doing pretty good. So I'm gonna give us 8 minutes for you to work through the first two questions in your row for your organization. As you work through them or see what your colleagues are adding, we can have a discussion. We can talk about what's coming up for you, but if you work best in silence, you can put us on mute for the next 8 minutes. Last call for tech support before folks jump into answering these first two questions.
Yeah, we need some tech support too. We're unable to access.
Thank you. Mickey, could you send that over to Kurt? Thank you. Sorry, this is one of those, I wish we had a chat here. If folks aren't able to access Miro, feel free to start writing in an email your responses to these questions, and I can add them. I can grab your email and add them in. You should be able to see my shared screen with the two questions there. Colleen?
Yeah, I don't see a row for Fuse. I'm sorry, I don't know the program well enough to duplicate.
You're right. I don't think I added Fuse. As you said that, let me add you. I'm going to add you at the bottom so you won't be in alphabetical order, but it shouldn't throw folks off. Sorry about that. All right, we have about 2 more minutes for these first 2 questions. If you're already done, you can start to take a look through your colleagues' responses. One really important tool with Miro is that you can zoom in and out. I should have said that about 25 minutes ago. You can zoom in and out to make the font as big as you need it. You should be able to do that either with your trackpad or in the bottom right-hand corner. There's a plus and minus to zoom in and out. We have about a minute left. Do folks need more time than that? Okay.
You know, Brittany, I thought I had Miro on, but I've not been able to access anything.
That's okay. If you want to, we can do follow-up for folks that aren't able to access Miro. After the meeting, you can email me your additions. We have some members who aren't here. This is a chart that we will keep filling out and keep building out throughout. So if you're not able to access to input, that's okay. We'll start scrolling through in just a minute to read your colleagues' responses.
Okay.
And Eliza, I apologize. I think your sticky note got moved around. So I think I only have your first answer here. We may need to move your second into the right box. Oh, that's our timer. Okay. So I don't know that we'll be able to get through everyone today, but I think we should be able to have about 10 or 15 minutes of discussion around each other's mandates. So let's take a look. I'm going to move us through slowly on the shared screen for folks who don't have access to Miro so that you can read through your colleagues' responses. Give you 2 minutes to read through, and I'll scroll through as we go along. Okay. So as we look around the task force and as we scroll through folks' responses, what do your organization's mandates have in common? What are the similarities you see, even in your wording in the mandates as it's stated here, or as you understand them, as you look at this Zoom square screen of other partners in the table? What do your organization's mandates have in common? Jump on in, no need to raise hands for this one. Kristen, did you have a question?
No, I think that was from earlier.
Gotcha. Thanks. What do folks notice your organization's mandates have in common? Tara?
It's all working with humans.
Beautiful. It's true. What else do you all have in common? It's all working with humans.
I mean, I see it like a shared purpose here, right? I mean, that's the number one thing.
And what's that shared purpose as you see it?
We all want to, you know, house humans and provide services for humans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And where do the mandates differ? What do you see that diverges? One thing that I'm noticing here is that we have service provision and decision-making as separate mandates that not oftentimes does the same organization hold that full purpose or the full spectrum. What other differences do folks see across mandates? I'm seeing a lot of advocacy in folks' mandates as well as strategy setting. But funding seems to be separate from that strategy and advocacy seem to go together here, but funding and decision-making around funding seem to be in separate mandates in a few places, which is interesting. Let's see. Other observations of the overlap or lack thereof between mandates? What gaps? So our last question here, and I think one of the most important ones, what gaps in mandates and responsibilities do you either see in this chart or know exist in the community's efforts to prevent and end homelessness? What gaps are there? What responsibilities aren't covered? Tara?
I don't see any mandates that talk about bridging the two responsibilities, because I think that, and I apologize, I have like 4 screens open right now because of Wi-Fi, so I'm looking at different screens. There's roles or mandates that address working with, doing direct service and doing that collaboration piece. And then there's mandates and roles that really just address like funding, codes, like totally on the other end of the spectrum. And there's just nothing there's no connector between those ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was just about to say the same exact thing. So yeah, that's where I see the gap.
And can you define the two ends of the spectrum again, maybe Councilor Perkins, the way that you're envisioning it?
Well, just the policy, the money, the sort of the governmental almost side of it versus the direct service provider, not versus, but, and then the direct service provider. And yeah, how do we, and maybe that's, you know, what this whole group is about. But how do you join those together so that there isn't this sort of gap in the middle, so that one group isn't telling the other group, this is how you should do it. And I'm speaking for, you know, myself being in that group. And how do we work together and fill that gap?
Thanks. Thanks for I appreciate you putting a finer point on that. I do think that that's the purpose of our work here, is seeing where we're all either overlapping, duplicating efforts potentially, and what gaps are not filled that need to be filled in order to improve or make our efforts sustainable, right? It's not sustainable for us to be working in silos on the exact same purpose of working with humans to support our neighbors. So thank you. Tammy, did you have something to add there? And then Tara.
Yes, and my apologies. I'm having technical difficulties. When I open it, then it gets garbled. So I sent mine to you, Brittany, in an email.
Thank you.
But what appears to be also missing, and I think it came up in one of the early conversations, is the accountability and the keeping us aligned in what it is that we are trying to strategically accomplish. And so when we did the 10-year plan to end homelessness and even the refresh in 2015, no one really owned that in terms of keeping it alive and making sure that that work, that we stayed mindful of what the gaps were, identifying funding to be able to address those gaps and fill those needs. And it feels like we have a number of organizations that are doing the things, but who's making sure that we are aligned in that strategic effort of rowing in that same direction that we've talked about as well?
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm curious, Tammy, what you see as far as geography here and where you see geographic overlaps and maybe differences, particularly coming from the regional perspective. In our last task force meeting, we talked about having regional partners at the table, but having a focus on Deschutes County, Bend, and Redmond specifically to begin with some targeted outreach and engagement with Sisters in La Pine to make sure that they see themselves in this opportunity, but really focusing within Deschutes County. And I'm curious how you see that overlap with COIC.
Well, I would share that we support a lot of the same individuals that we are talking about. And each community will need unique solutions to their own individual challenges. But at the same time, there's a whole lot that we can leverage from communities such as Bend and Redmond in Deschutes County, being our largest county in the region. And so I don't believe that there's a one size fits all, but there is and should be an alignment between those efforts in making sure that we are not fragmenting a system, which, as with this graphic, you can see that a lot of the organizations are supporting regional efforts. And so I think that we've done a good job of identifying the unique, like right now for the community of Redmond, they have not built just that foundational continuum of just basic services to support those that are unhoused. And the community of Bend has had, due to population, they've done had other opportunities to build a system that looks different. And so I think that we can learn a lot looking at it from a regional perspective, but I don't feel that we want to also walk away from the importance of addressing each unique community at the same time. And so one of the things that we've been asked to do as a regional support is possibly hold space to be able to be that organization that helps keep us accountable to the outcomes that we are trying to achieve. Without, we're not a service provider, we are a support to the region. And so, we don't have any other goals other than just making sure that it gets done. So I hope that helps to answer that question.
It does. It does. Thank you, Tammy. Colleen, did you have your hand up?
I've been doing this work for a long time, and this is kind of a light bulb for me, that the gap in between like the service providers, and I know that the county and city like generally don't see themselves as funders, especially compared with like HUD and some of the bigger amounts. But I think that gap is so indicative of like the different roles and the different power dynamics or like access to information. And I think, speaking as a nonprofit provider who's trying to like step into the space of leveraging and organizing resources, there's often just like a lack of capacity on our end to both like envision what could be and to clearly state the needs that we're seeing and to propose solutions. Because to be able to do any of that takes research and visiting another city and like having just like the brain space to step out of the crisis of the day-to-day and responding to needs to be able to think about what's possible and what could be. So I know that we could have done a better job in like creating a vision, like putting out proposals, and I think like being a more communicative partner but that requires having the space, which is hard to find when we're responding to so much urgency and like humans. So I think that that's been something I've seen happening a lot, and it speaks to everybody staying in their lanes and working really hard and being really passionate about their work. But that, yeah, the purpose of this and bridging that gap feels important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to highlight what you said about what's possible, because we're here today deciding what's possible. What we decide to bring of the tools that are in our everyday toolboxes, we're deciding how much we're going to make possible through the task force and the strategic plan. So by having these light bulb moments, by offering space to recognize how this process, how collaboration has and hasn't succeeded in the past, and growing from that, we're deciding what's going to be possible for the future of Central Oregon and for the future of the housing realities in Central Oregon. So thank you for lifting that up and reminding us that that's what we're here to do today. Any other thoughts before we shift away from this part of the conversation on mandates and responsibilities? I have one prompting question that may bring us into a couple more minutes of discussion, but do you see any of your partners underselling themselves here? Maybe not recognizing all of the decision-making or power that they hold as you scroll through. Do you have any questions, or do you want to remind any of your colleagues of other parts of their mandate that you see them fulfilling or responsible for? It's another way of looking at our spaces in between here. Tara.
I think that all of us can acknowledge how much work Colleen does. And maybe we pause for a second and just really, like, she needs some more sticky notes because of the amount of work and time that she puts into this entire issue.
I just want to clarify, Colleen Thomas, not Colleen Sinsky.
Sorry, Colleen Sinsky. Yes, Colleen Thomas.
I appreciate Colleen Sinsky for being the one to name that, because none of us want to undersell your work either. But yes, the Homeless Leadership Coalition carries a ton here, and there is one designated person for that. And it is not all of Colleen Thomas's time that gets designated to that either. So this is a lot that's held right there. I appreciate you lifting that up, Tara. And also something I want to recognize that I've heard in conversations and kind of seen play out is that HLC holds that space in between in a vacuum where other partners are on either end of that spectrum, whether it be policymaking, funding decisions, prioritization, and service provision. HLC seems to operate in the space between, but maybe without the full mandate to do so, to inform upstream and to let service providers to be the full connective tissue. And I think one of those limits is Colleen's time, because miraculously she is only one person, despite holding so much of this portfolio. So thank you for lifting that up, Tara. And I think that's going to be a topic as we move through these conversations in the future. So you'll see from the chart, we'll make sure everyone gets access to it, or that we have friendly versions that work for everyone here. I see us moving some stuff around, so I'm just going to fix that. So today we worked through these first two questions. The follow-up here is going to be for you to work on your second two questions and finalizing the first two over the next week or so. I'll send a reminder via email, but please do come back into the Miro board, maybe with your team or other colleagues, to just brainstorm and make sure that you have everything here so that we can build on this in future conversations. And Colleen, did you have a question before we move on?
Oh, just briefly, I just know that neighbor impact holds a major role in a lot of this, and I think it would be helpful to see how they envision that as part of this conversation in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Neighbor impact, Housing Works, who else? Central Oregon Health Council. Some of our key task force members aren't here, which is part of why we're not moving into any decision-making from this. We're just analyzing together so that we can get others' input and build on it. So keep checking back into the Miro board too for when they post their responses, and we'll share an update with task force members. So someone has unveiled my surprise here, but I won't be mad at you because we're all new at Miro board. So I'm just going to cover up my surprise again and pretend you don't know about it. For the last 5 minutes or so, we're going to talk about scoping the strategic plan. The purpose of the task force, as we all know and as we've talked about in previous meetings, is to bring you all together to share your expertise and to guide county-wide investments and actions toward preventing and ending houselessness in Deschutes County, with, as we've said, a focus on Redmond and Bend. We've set out to undertake a strategic planning process that will be completed by the end of November. And what we'd like to do with these last 5 minutes is start to decide what is within the scope of that strategic plan. You'll see I have some discussion questions in colorful sticky notes up here. We don't have time for this discussion, as I somewhat anticipated. You are welcome to drop your thoughts as sticky notes following the meeting around these. That is a giant sticky note. That's not what I meant to do. You can drop your notes right here like this. I'll clean it up after our meeting so you can respond to these questions directly. But since we are a big group, since we have a lot of work to do, and since I have had the great fortune of having conversations with most of you, I've come up with a proposal for the scope of the strategic plan, anticipating we wouldn't be able to get into it fully together today. This is my suggestion and maybe my recommendation, intended for us to edit it right now, give immediate reactions, and start finessing until we have a solid scope of the strategic plan that we're all comfortable with. So based on my conversations with you, what I would suggest is included in the strategic plan is all available federal, state, and local funding streams that can be used to prevent and end homelessness. And that is to include budget commitments and projections around them. Curious if folks have concerns, thumbs up about that being the scope of the strategic plan. To get more detail on that, you can look down at the domains section. These are the types of things we'll be addressing in the strategic plan: governance, roles, and responsibilities, as we just talked through. I'll be doing a gaps analysis that I've started it already, and I'm working very closely with a lot of you on that. We'll be bringing that to our next discussion. So the strategic plan will be grounded in data and a shared understanding of what the community has as assets in preventing and ending homelessness and where its gaps are. And the strategic plan will also include funding priorities, service strategies, continuous quality improvement, and addressing state and regional relationships. Kind of how do we move and connect to beyond the hyper local here. How does that scope sound to folks? What's missing here? What do you like about it? I know this is a tight conversation. We are very low on time, but I also think that's okay. If folks can put on their initial or offer their initial reactions, we can keep building this out offline between this meeting and our next. Councillor Perkins.
Phil Chang was ahead of me, so go ahead, Phil.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Tang, your hand is in the white of your window. I couldn't see it.
The scope statement puts a heavy emphasis on funding, and funding is going to be extremely important. But I think a big part of what we need to do in the county and the region is we need to build various kinds of capacity. And the funding is going to be necessary for that capacity, but if we haven't kind of figured out and mapped out what kind of capacity we need to build, then chasing money, it may not it may not get us to where we need to go. So I think that part of what we need to do is think about, okay, like how many camping sites do we need? How many beds do we need? But, so that kind of capacity, but also the service provider capacity, the wraparound service capacity, all of those kinds of capacities that are going to be needed to help support people experiencing homelessness and move them to a new place.
The strategy behind the strategic plan, in addition to the funding to get us there.
Right.
Yep. Got it. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I made some edits live there. Let me know if they capture it, but we can keep building too. Councillor Perkins.
Phil took the words out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. That, whether it's staffing at a county city level, whether it's building more capacity with our service providers, that's the one thing that I know I hear over and over again. And so, yeah, what are options? What are things that we can be looking at to the future to make sure that we are able to address this big need in our community?
And I think there's also a sustainability piece in there too, of making this work sustainable, which was where I was going and focusing on funding, and appreciate the recentering of the work that truly needs to be done. And the funding, I think, is addressing what was mentioned earlier about past strategic plans, that we didn't put the teeth behind it to make the work happen. So we're getting to a finer balance here. We are right at 12 o'clock, which is great. I am going to follow up with Commissioner Chang and Councillor Perkins as our chairs of the task force to work on finessing the scope of the strategic plan a bit more, and come back with maybe a final recommendation before or at our next meeting, where we'll also undertake the gaps analysis. Do folks have any questions or needs before we wrap up today? It was a quick meeting, but appreciate everyone's presence and attentiveness to the conversation. All right. I hope you all have a great Tuesday. Stay tuned for subgroup updates, as well as some information requests as we fill out this gaps analysis and move toward our September meeting. I will be keeping close track of Delta and the situation in Central Oregon, and hopefully be making my way down there to see you all in person soon. In the meantime, I hope you all take good care. Thank you again for your time today. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.